Hello again, I'm just a guy who loves to make props and stuff. And in this video, I'm making the Infinity Time Stone in the Eye of Agamotto. So for the second stone on my prop maker journey to make all the Infinity Stones, I chose the Eye of Agamotto as the vessel for the Infinity Time Stone. To start off this build, I found this amazing 3D model of the artifact on MyMiniFactory. You can find a link to it in my description. The model was an easy printout, and it had a lot of awesome looking details on it, but still, I felt it could do with even some more ornaments on the inside parts. So I made some changes to the model and added a simple display stand before printing it out again in a slightly bigger scale this time. I couldn't make the details as good as the other parts, but for my 3D skill level, I think it will suffice. Once the model was cleaned off, I tried to find an actual Infinity Stone to make a resin casting of. I didn't quite find what I was looking for. So to make the perfect fit and the look I was going for, I made a clay model to use instead. I actually made two copies with different shapes and texture at this point, because I still wasn't quite sure how I wanted the actual stone to look in the end. The molding was pretty straightforward. I hot glued down the stone, made a simple frame for it, and then poured the silicone. The next day I could unbox it, so to say. And to my surprise, the mold had no air bubbles in it, which was nice. So I guess if you take your time with stirring the silicone slowly, you don't need a vacuum machine thing. Meanwhile, I was working on the main piece of the prop at the same time. I started with doing a cold acetone vapor smoothing, because this prop had a lot of small and hard to get to details. If you want to know more about how I do my vapor smoothing, just watch my video on building the Destiny Hawkmoon hand cannon. Next I went over the parts with a sanding sponge before applying some plain Tamiya surface primer. After the first coat, it was easy to see there was some areas that needed some spot putty and sanding. And then I could give it a final coat of primer. In the MCU of Doctor Strange, I believe the Eye of Agamotto is more bronze than gold, and it's got some silver details. But still, I went with all gold. It's more in line with the comics, and besides, I love the Indiana Jones artifact feeling you get with going all gold. And I do have this amazing gold lacquer paint. I believe I've had this single bottle for over 10 years now. Once the gold paint had cured, I mixed up some brown and black earthy colors to start off the weathering. I used acrylic paints, but you can just as easily go for some oil paints for this part, I guess. I brushed on the paint in smaller areas, and then wiped almost all of it off again. It's almost like painting with a paper towel. I wanted to go really dark in some places, especially on the inside. But doing a little bit at a time gives me more control over the final look of it. And for the finish, I applied some gold gilding wax to bring up some of the highlights again. And it helps it to look less uniformed, but more like a natural wear and tear. Just missing the Infinity Stone now. Returning to the stone, I started by soldering some LEDs to some wires, hooking up a switch and some batteries. I would later on drop these LED lights into the resin casting. I mixed up some resin in accordance with the label, and I added some tinted green color to it. Then once the resin was poured in the mold, I added some small bits of plastic wrapping film to disperse the light better and hide the LEDs that would go in at the end. The next day I had two stones to choose from. They were different both in shape and color. I chose the darkest one, and then I did some wet sanding and polishing to it before attaching it to the rest of the prop. It's a rather small prop, so I believe having the Eye of Agamotto displayed on a shelf by itself would look a bit underwhelming. So I wanted to make a small chest for it. Still sticking with 3D printing for this build, I used Tinkercad to design a simple chest. I painted all the parts in a dark brown acrylic, before I got to use some more of my awesome gold lacquer paint. Next I would dress the inside of the chest with some fabric. Once I decided which one to use, I cut it down to size and glued it on a piece of EVA foam. I made several pieces like this one, and once I put the top lid thing on, the walls looked thicker and the whole chest looked more rigid and real. The lid I wanted to make was a bit more complex. I wanted the design to have more ties to the Sorcerer Supreme. So taking the symbol you might recognize from, for instance, the window in the sanctum, I used this symbol which I wanted to engrave on some acrylic and use as a kind of a window on a magical chest. I used my vinyl cutter to make a stencil, which I applied on a piece of acrylic. Then engraving the negative space between with my Dremel rotary tool. Once that was done, I removed the vinyl and the masking, and I can see it was a perfect fit, and I was really happy with the result. And there was just enough space to install an LED light strip. This was all in an attempt to make the window light up, and the engraved ornament to stand out more. The hinges were also 3D printed. The display chest was almost complete. I just had to do something about the exterior top part of the chest. It looked kind of dull. So again, sticking with the symbol as a theme, I made a more detailed pattern that would go on top. And finally I weathered the whole chest the same way I did the Eye of Agamotto. And as usual, whenever my prop has details that's supposed to be some kind of metal, I like to get in some brighter red, greens and orange colors too. Makes it look a bit rusty, eroded and old. And that was the final piece of work I did on this prop. And that was it for this video. I hope you liked it, and if so, just hit the subscribe button and I will try and share my next build with you. Thanks for watching.